Welcome back to Investing Talk podcast. We're going to be looking at Baytex Energy today.
Yeah.
It's a Canadian energy company, and they're doing their operations in a couple of places. One is the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin,
Right.
and the other is the Eagle Ford down in Texas. You sent over a lot of really interesting information. We've got technical analysis, a company overview,
Mm-hmm.
recent stock assessments, really kind of paints a picture, with some interesting complexities for this energy player.
I agree.
So what we're going to try to do today is sort of break down these different perspectives and pull out these insights, really try to help you understand what is happening with Baytex Energy. We'll look at their recent performance, kind of their financial health, market sentiment, what the future might hold, all based on what you sent over.
Sounds good.
So let's maybe start with the recent price action. The stock right now is around $3.20.
Okay.
It's had a pretty, considerable range over the past year from like $2.89 up to $4.65. So that suggests some pretty, significant price movement.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's something that it really pops out. The amount of volatility that you see there in the energy sector. You kind of expect some volatility,
Right.
but that's a a considerable swing. And then looking at some of the technical data that you sent me, the recent trading volume
Yeah.
is really pretty notably low. It's around 15,525 shares.
Wow.
If you compare that to the average, which is about 8.8 million,
Yeah.
you're seeing a substantial decrease there.
Really?
So that lower volume coupled with the price trading below both the 50 and the 200-day moving averages
All right.
really suggests that those big institutional investors, they're on the sidelines right now.
Yeah.
It looks like they might not be super confident, maybe even with the valuation metrics we'll talk about later,
Right.
And sometimes when you don't have the institutional interest, they, kind of keep that downward trend going for a little while.
Right. So significant drop in volume. The bearish trend is clear. But then the technical analysis also mentioned something called the Relative Strength Index, or RSI.
Right.
And, for those who might not be looking at this every day, could you just take a second and kind of explain why that's a useful indicator here?
Absolutely, yeah. So the RSI is what's called a momentum oscillator.
Right.
And it really kind of helps us understand the speed and how much the price is changing. And a reading below 30
Yep.
can mean that things are oversold.
Right.
Which is basically a little hint that, hey, there might be a buying opportunity here.
Yeah.
The stock might be due for a rebound, but, it really becomes like more meaningful when you're also looking at other signals.
Right.
Like divergence.
Yeah.
Or a break of a trend line. So, we don't have the current RSI for Baytex,
Right.
but I think that's right on to point out that it is important, and especially if you're a potential buyer,
Yeah.
keep an eye on that. Keep an eye out for some entry points.
Okay, so RSI could offer clues if you're thinking about maybe getting in. One of the sources had a technical recommendation of hold for current investors. What's the thinking behind that?
Well, the hold recommendation probably means that they're trying to kind of balance things out here.
Right.
So while the technical analysis, it could mean that the stock is trading at a discount
Yeah.
to what, people perceive as its fair value. That kind of suggests that there's some long-term potential.
Yeah.
But the recent downward price action and just that the energy market's volatile, that suggests some caution,
Right.
in the near term.
Of course, yeah.
But the advice for buyers, keep watching the RSI, look for that breakout above that 200-day moving average. That's pretty specific.
Yeah.
And that's a nice strategy, for like really being able to see, oh, there might be a shift in momentum
Right.
before you jump in.
That's helpful, yeah, acknowledging there's that long-term possibility, but, being mindful of the current, uncertainties.
Right.
Let's shift gears a little bit and look at the company's fundamentals.
Okay.
Baytex Energy, they're mainly focused on oil and gas production, both in Canada and Texas, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So their main thing is acquiring, developing, and producing light oil, heavy oil, natural gas liquids, and just straight up natural gas.
Right.
And, when you look at that alongside, how their stock's been doing lately, you see some trends that are a little worrisome.
Yeah.
It's gone down quite a bit recently, over 12% just in the past month,
Wow.
about 8% over the last 6 months. And big chunk, 36% over the past year.
Yeah, those are pretty substantial drops. And you mentioned earlier volatility. It looks like it's even amplified more with a beta of 2.53.
Yeah, a beta of 2.53. That basically means that, Baytex's stock price, it tends to go up and down a lot more
Right.
than the general market. And given the energy sector, it's always sensitive to those commodity prices and global events, so it's not really a total surprise, this heightened volatility,
Yeah.
but it is definitely something to watch.
Yeah, for sure. So let's dive into the financials a little bit. The trailing 12-month revenue is pretty solid, 3.33 billion Canadian dollars.
Yeah.
And they've reported a net income of 236.60 million Canadian dollars, with earnings per share of 31 Canadian cents.
Okay.
At first glance, those numbers look, reasonably healthy.
Yeah, they definitely show a good bit of business activity
Yeah.
and that they're making a profit.
Yeah.
But this is where I think we need to look at some of the, the red flags
Okay.
that are in your sources there. You see negative EPS in some reports
Yeah.
and low current ratio of 0.8.
Yeah.
And, that really raises some questions about, how consistent is their profitability
Yeah.
and are they healthy in the short term?
Right.
Because when that current ratio is under 1, it usually means that they might have trouble meeting those short-term liabilities with just liquid assets.
I see.
So they might end up having to borrow more.
Right.
That costs more money.
Yeah.
Or they might even have to sell assets at a bad time
Right.
if the cash flow isn't enough to cover things. So
Yeah.
investors are going to want to keep a close eye on that for sure.
Yeah, that low current ratio does sound like a big concern, even though the revenue numbers are solid.
Right.
But your sources also pointed out some strengths, a good gross margin of 68.38%,
Mm-hmm.
and, healthy operating cash flow.
Right.
So how do we kind of reconcile these seemingly, conflicting signals here?
Yeah, well, that strong gross margin and that operating cash flow, that means that their main operations, they're running pretty efficiently.
Right.
They're able to bring in that cash.
Yeah.
The difference might be things like big capital expenditures, maybe write-downs or, other expenses that aren't directly related to operations.
Right.
That's kind of hitting their bottom line in certain periods, and then you see the negative EPS pop up in those reports.
Right.
And the low current ratio, even though they got good cash flow, it might mean there's some issues with like when the money's coming in and when the money's going out.
Okay.
Or maybe they got a lot of short-term debt.
Got it.
And that's why, it's tricky to just look at the top line numbers.
Mm-hmm.
To figure out if a company's really financially healthy, you got to look a little deeper.
Right. Okay, so we see kind of a mixed financial picture.
Mm-hmm.
Efficient operations, but maybe some near-term financial, pressures. So let's talk about how the market is looking at Baytex. We touched on BMO with a market perform rating.
Right.
What's the overall sentiment?
Well, it looks like there's a bit of cautious optimism,
Right.
along with some underlying worry.
Yeah.
Some of the recent news articles are kind of positive. They're talking about increased output forecasts,
Right.
which could mean more revenue down the line.
Yeah.
But overall, I think the market's still a little hesitant
Mm-hmm.
because you just never know what's going to happen with energy. And, the recent stock performance hasn't been, super encouraging.
Okay, and how does Baytex, how do they stack up against those bigger players, in the Canadian energy scene, like Cenovus Energy and Canadian Natural Resources?
Yeah, so Baytex is definitely playing in the same field
Right.
as those big guys, but it's a much smaller company.
Yeah.
They're smart though. They're focusing on key areas like the Eagle Ford
Yeah.
and the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin.
Right.
But those larger companies, they're all over the place,
They're more diversified. Yeah.
So Baytex is strong in their little niche though, and that gives them an edge.
So it's that focused approach.
Exactly.
That's interesting. Looking forward, the next earnings report is set for May 5th, 2025.
Okay.
That seems like a pretty important date for investors to kind of circle on the calendar.
Absolutely, yeah. Earnings reports, those are the things that really give you a peek into how a company's doing.
Yeah.
And what they think might happen in the future.
Right.
I'm sure this upcoming report's going to be, one of those big moments.
Yeah.
That could really move the stock.
Right.
Investors are going to be reacting to that new data.
Right.
With the management saying all that stuff.
Absolutely.
And, it's just like your sources said, there's regulatory changes in the energy sector.
Yeah.
And you can never predict oil prices, right?
Yeah. Right.
Those are big factors.
Yeah.
They're going to keep influencing how Baytex does and how investors feel.
So one big thing that happened with Baytex was the acquisition of Ranger Oil back in June of 2023. How does that kind of play into the current, analysis?
So buying Ranger Oil, that was a strategic move.
Okay.
They wanted to really boost those operational efficiencies and get a lot more assets, especially in the Eagle Ford.
Okay.
So the idea is that, being bigger
Right.
and streamlining those operations, it's going to help them do better overall.
Right.
And maybe even address some of those financial worries we talked about in the long run.
Okay.
These mergers and acquisitions in the energy sector, a lot of times it comes down to wanting to be more efficient
Right.
and having a bigger presence in the market.
Okay, so the Ranger Oil acquisition, it's seen as something that could potentially, bolster their financial standing down the line
Right.
through increased scale and efficiency. Let's bring this back to some of the financial indicators that we're seeing in relation to the stock price.
Okay.
We've got a normalized price-to-earnings ratio of 9.09 and a return on assets of 7.76%.
Okay.
What can we glean from those numbers?
Okay, so the normalized PE ratio, that 9.09, that kind of shows you how much investors are willing to pay
Yeah.
for every dollar that Baytex earns.
Okay.
Now, a lower PE ratio can sometimes be a sign that the stock is undervalued,
Okay.
but you got to look at it along with their growth potential
Right.
and the risks.
Right.
So the return on assets, that's 7.76%. That tells you how good they are at using their assets to actually make a profit.
Okay.
So a higher ROA is generally a good thing. It means they're using their stuff well.
Okay.
They're efficient.
Right, and then that quick ratio of 0.70 that just keeps coming back
Yeah,
to highlight that potential short-term liquidity challenge.
absolutely. Yeah, it's still a key thing to watch. It suggests that they might be a little vulnerable
Yeah.
when it comes to meeting those immediate financial obligations,
Right.
using their most liquid assets.
Okay.
And the market cap of around $2.7 billion,
Yeah.
that kind of shows you the market's overall valuation of the company right now
Okay.
and just how much attention investors are giving it,
Right.
given everything we've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, last question. What role does the dividend yield play in Baytex Energy's stock performance?
Well, even though the dividend yield, it might be appealing to investors who are looking for some income,
Yeah.
it doesn't look like it's the main thing driving those stock price swings.
Okay.
Things like oil prices, production volumes,
Yeah.
and just how financially healthy the company is overall.
Right.
Those have a much bigger impact on how investors feel.
Okay, so it's more about those bigger market forces
Exactly.
and the company's overall health.
Right.
Okay. Well, I think, kind of putting it all together that we see this company with efficient operations, a strategic acquisition aimed at, future growth,
Right.
but also some, pretty noticeable financial hurdles.
Yeah.
And they're in a, kind of volatile sector.
Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well.
Yeah.
And the recommendations from the sources you sent, they reflect all this, this mixed bag.
Yeah.
One of them straight up says, hold if you're already in.
Yeah.
Another one's like, well, hold or buy if you can handle the roller coaster. And then even one says, hey, if you don't like risk, sell, until they get their financial act together a little more.
Right. So it's really about the individual
Yeah,
investor.
absolutely. It just shows you, if you're looking at a company like Baytex, you got to really think about your own goals as an investor and how much risk you can stomach.
Right. So looking at all this, Baytex Energy, it's not a simple situation.
Yeah.
While they're running things well and that Ranger Oil deal looks promising for the future, you can't ignore those financial, those blips on the radar.
Right.
And the market's just not super stable.
It's a shaky ground right now.
Yeah. So as you're kind of looking at this investment, it's
Yeah.
interesting to think about how the technical analysis, hints that there might be a good deal there in the long run.
Yeah.
But then you've got those fundamental worries about, their liquidity and the stock's been going down. So it's a real question for you, the listener. How do you balance, those short-term risks
Right.
with the possibility of some good long-term gains in a sector like energy that's always, going up and down?
That's the $1,000,000 question right there.
Yeah.
Figuring out how to balance that out, that's the key to making a smart decision.
Well, hey, thanks for sending us all this information.
You got it.
Really appreciate it. We hope this breakdown, gave you a better grasp on, what's happening with Baytex Energy.
Hmm.
If you found this helpful
Yeah.
and you want us to dig into some other investment topics, make sure you subscribe, like, and leave us a comment.
Always appreciate that.
All right, catch you later. See ya.